Before we start the show, I want to remind everyone that while the SAG-AFTRA and Writers Guild of America strike is going on, we can still support those who are picketing for a better future. Some of you are wondering, how can we support our wonderful creative artists who are on the front lines fighting for better residuals? You can visit the Entertainment Community Fund website and make your donation there. I will also include in the description other donation sites you can visit and help support the cause. However, if you're unable to donate for those in need of the strike, make sure you spread the word on various social media sites you're on. And to all the people out there who are protesting, the Lone Screenplay Nominee podcast supports your efforts and will continue to do so until a justified deal is made. Without your hard work, spending hours upon hours pouring your hearts and souls into making these wonderful films, we wouldn't be able to experience such amazing stories as we've been able to do so for over 100 years so far. Keep up the great work, guys, and stay hydrated. Hello, listeners. Welcome to the Lone Screenplay Nominee podcast, where we talk about films that were solely nominated for an Oscar in the writing categories. I'm your host, Matthew Anderson, and today we have Zita Short, who is also a host of her own podcast called the 300 Passions Podcast, in which I've already been on 2 episodes before. Welcome to the show, Zita. How are you doing today?
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me on. I'm doing very well. I'm in high spirits.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm glad at least one of us is in high enough spirits, I guess. So I have a couple questions to ask you before we dive into our episode and the movie you've picked for today's episode. Would you care to explain to our audience what exactly you do for a living, or what exactly your 300 Passions podcast is about for those of us who aren't familiar with your show?
So, I guess my day job is being a data entrant, and I'm hoping to become an academic, but that's still a while off. I do moonlight as a film critic for In Session Film, so you can see occasional reviews and general commentary from me. And then I host my own podcast, the 300 Passions podcast, where I talk about a range of American romantic dramas and comedies with a lot of different guests from all around the world, including Matthew, who's from exotic Pennsylvania. So that was a real thrill for me. And I also serve as one of the hosts on the Women in Session podcast, which is a branch of the In Session Film family of podcasts. And we talk about feminism in cinema and a wide variety of topics related to both contemporary and classic film.
Awesome. Yeah, it's I keep forgetting you're on In Session podcast. To be honest, but I'm also glad too that I don't know how that whole process was for to have a whole female section for In Session podcast, but it's nice to see that there's a lot more female critics in out there in the world than just, because it's a very male dominated area, unfortunately. So, but yeah, no, I'm glad that something like that exists. And once again, I'm really grateful to have you on the podcast, Zita. And appreciate your time being on here. My next question I'm going to be asking you is a question I always asked my guests in the past. Instead of asking you what's your favorite film, what is your favorite genre of film?
Well, God, that's difficult to narrow down. Uh, hmm. This is a difficult genre to define in a way, but I do like a good domestic drama. M- If you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said romantic movies, but I think that's too wide of a criteria to
Yeah.
apply in a way, to refer to it as a genre
Hmm.
unto itself. And it gets especially complicated because the vast majority of movies have a romantic subplot, even if that's not the driving force behind the narrative. And so, do all of those movies count as romantic films? So it gets complicated there. But I would say I love a good screwball comedy and movies about people going through a great deal of personal drama. That's thrilling to me, especially when you have a kind of um, bitchy, uncontrollable woman at the center of the story.
So when you said you love a good domestic drama film, I don't know why, but my head immediately went to something like, which I've never seen it, but I've always heard about it, Revolutionary Road. I don't know why,
Oh,
but
God,
I'm like,
terrible.
but yeah, I'm well aware that you're not a fan of that movie. So yeah, but yeah, no, yeah, yeah, that's interesting though. Domestic dramas, huh? But yeah, never really
Hmm.
pegged you as the type for that. I thought you'd be more interested in the like, obviously the older classic, as you said, romantic films to begin with. Especially when you have a podcast like 300 Passions, talking all about, romantic
Mm.
movies. So, yeah. But yeah, no, it's interesting
Yeah.
and yeah, that's cool. So, if you don't mind, Zita, let's dive into our discussion for Casanova 70, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, perfect. So, like I said, we're here to discuss Mario Monicelli. I know I butchered that name.
Mario
Um,
Monicelli.
Monicelli. Okay, Mario Monicelli, Casanova 70, from 1965. This won't be a beat by beat bulletin point presentation like you'd hear on other channels, but we will be discussing major spoilers for our talk. If you haven't seen the film yet and want to hear our full thoughts on it, watch the film first and then come back to hear us talk about it. I will admit that unlike the last few films that we've done in the past, it's a little bit harder to find because it took me a little bit of time to find a copy of Casanova 70, but I was able to find one just in time before we recorded. And the other thing I should also note to our audience who are familiar with the last few episodes, for this film, it's a little bit hard to find what kind of production history was behind for the making of this, just because it's an older film. There's not really like I couldn't really find much history behind it or even find like a documentary or like behind the scene bulletin points that I would see on like, whatever it is, IMDb or a commentary track or whatever. But the only thing that I found in terms of note for the production was the fact that this is supposedly an updated take on the famous character Casanova. Um, and like I said, it's directed by Mario Monicelli, who also had a hand in writing the script alongside Agnori Incroci, uh, Suzo Cecchi Diamarco, Tonino Guerra, and uh, Gio Grio Gio Salivoni. It's really tough to pronounce these like non-American names. I
Oh,
apologize.
okay.
And Furio Scarpelli. So forgive me about the pronunciation for these people, but it's really hard. Yeah. So, anyways, so
Okay.
those are the writers attached to this. Some of Mario's directorial credits include The Usual Identified Thieves, The Great War, The Girl with the Pistol, and Viva Italia. Outside of Mario's original screenplay nomination for this film, he was also nominated the year prior for The Organizer in the original screenplay category. Unfortunately, Mario is no longer with us. He passed away in 2010 at the age of 95, and I didn't realize this until as I was setting up for the episode. Committed suicide a couple days after he was admitted to a hospital in Rome due to
Hmm.
he was in terminal stage of prostate cancer. Yeah, and apparently he kept working on movies until like 2006. I think he kept directing until, which is it's pretty nuts. Yeah, he was like 95, like I said. So yeah, rest in peace, man. Yeah, and as far as the log line for this, the amorous adventures of Andrea Rossi Colombotti. I think I butchered that name too. An army officer who finds
Wow.
pleasure with beautiful women in life-threatening situations. So, yeah, essentially, this, this is essentially like a I'm trying to think of like a similar story to
It's a
this.
sex comedy.
Yeah, it's a sex comedy, and Andrea's trying to find out from his, uh, was it um psychiatric doctor of like why can't he, like, sort of get it up, so to speak. And
Hmm.
and he finds out, oh, it's because you whenever you are in the mood, it's because you want to do these like dangerous moments, like having sex in front of the public, or like you're about to climb into a woman's window without her knowing you're going to be there, things like that to sort of get you going. And and so he's essentially trying to find out, okay, how do I combat this demon and try not to avoid those kind of urges and go for the more different approach. But yeah, that's pretty much the premise of the movie. And before we continue with my thoughts on the film, I wanted to ask you, Zita, because I found this to be, even watching this, I was like, I really want to know what was the reason behind Zita's pick for this. And was this a first watch for you, or had you already seen it before?
I had seen it before about 4 years ago,
Oh,
and I
wow.
didn't have the strongest memories of it, so I wanted to revisit it in a way for that reason. There are a lot of other nominees that left a much stronger impact, and so, oh, this sounds incredibly cynical, but rewatching them, I felt that I wouldn't get as much out of that experience. Whereas this film that I didn't remember much about, it could reveal something new to me on a second viewing. And I suppose I selected it because I am fascinated by this period in the history of the Best Original Screenplay category. I feel as though it's very different now. You see a lot of the big nominees getting into this category. It's less common for one of the highest grossing films of the year to be adapted from a book, whereas back in the 60s, and essentially going all the way back to the start of the Hollywood film industry, you did have these big bestsellers that would be made into blockbuster films. And that meant that the Best Original Screenplay category didn't typically feature your Best Picture nominees or movies that made big showings in other categories. It was sort of an odds and ends category where foreign films or movies that didn't necessarily achieve great commercial success could make a showing. And you notice that throughout this decade, Italian cinema seemed to be very popular with voters. And that makes sense. Of course, this was during a boom period for the Italian film industry. You have the modernist movement in full swing. At the same time, a lot of these films that did get nominated aren't necessarily the stone cold art house classics from this period. You're not talking about La Dolce Vita or La Notte or Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion. You do get these movies that have fallen into obscurity nowadays, that haven't had that long lasting cultural impact. And in terms of Casanova 70's reputation, it is one of the better regarded films from Mario Monticelli, but I would argue that its reputation is dwarfed by something like Big Deal on Madonna Street, which was, I think, his biggest hit, certainly his best known film today, and probably serves as a better text to be analyzed for academics. It is this intriguing blend of the social concerns of Italian neo realist filmmakers and then this sort of light, comedic, fluffy tone, which was quite unexpected for that period. Casanova 70, on the other hand, comes out after the sort of Italian comedy movement has come into full swing. It's not quite as revolutionary as Big Deal on Madonna Street was,
Hmm.
and so it's less notable in a way. Anyway, sorry for the big ramble,
No, you're good.
but I think I was intrigued by just how sort of minor this film seems nowadays, even though it was a bit of a hit at the time and does seem to be ripe for reappraisal.
Hmm. Um, Yeah, I don't really have too much to note in terms of Mario as a director. It wasn't until in the middle of the movie I was like, have I seen this director in anything before in terms of his films? And I actually was on Juan Carlos Ollano's the One Inch Barrier podcast a while back. We were discussing War and Peace, and on it he had asked me to watch the five nominees that year, and I saw The Girl with the Stolen Pistol, or The Girl with the Pistol, and I saw that and I thought that was decent. And I haven't seen anything else from Mario Monicelli yet as a director. And the vibe I got from the what was it, the girl with with the the pistol, was that I thought there's elements in this movie that I thought were decent and engaging sometimes, and it even ends on like a decent like an interest, like an entertaining enough note where I'm like, okay, that was, nice ending. But I think as a whole, I don't think it works quite as well. Like in my, like I thought overall it was okay in my opinion. And I don't really like, I was writing notes down in the middle of the movie, and like obviously as I do, and I pay attention to through most of it, but I just kept thinking to myself about halfway through, or maybe even like two-thirds into it, I was like, I surprisingly am not like as note heavy extensive on the film like I am with the last few films. Like, the last episode, Nightcrawler, I had a ton of notes that I went over, and we went into full detail on that movie. And with this one, I don't really have a whole lot here. Other than, like I said, it's a well-made movie, and I thought it was okay. Like I'm curious to see to do a little bit more research on Monicelli's filmography as a whole, because I'd assume he's regarded as like a big name, especially when you would think he's regarded as like a big name, because he's got two Oscar nominations on his hands for the original screenplay categories, and he's had four other films nominated in the international film category. Um, so yeah, yeah, I mean, and if nothing else, I'm definitely curious in seeing more of the main actor in the movie, Marcello Mastroianni.
Marcello Mastroianni.
You got it. Yeah, who I think he's been nominated like three or four times as an actor before. Yeah,
And
three
he's a
three times.
prolific actor and is generally regarded as sort of the biggest movie star that Italy has ever produced, and obviously appears in a lot of those iconic Italian classics from this period, and then even beyond this sort of art house boom of the 50s and 60s, moves on to work with Angelopoulos and a wide variety of other art house filmmakers. And like a lot of these actors, he sort of ends up taking refuge in France, where they kept making art house films long after the sort of period in which American audiences held a deep interest in foreign films had ended.
Hmm, interesting. Um, yeah, yeah. So I'll definitely be looking more into Marcello. I'll be looking into his filmography, both him and the director down the road. But yeah, no, like I said, I thought the movie we're talking about, Casanova 70, I thought it was a decent movie. It wasn't anything great. And I think the biggest issue I had with it is, well, one, I think the film could have been tighter, made it like a 90-minute movie. And at first I was, it took me a while to sort of get into the movie a bit. And part of that I think was because of it doesn't really have much of a like structure, and I'm fine with the movie taking risks and doing something different and unique in terms of the way it's telling its story. Knives Out kind of broke that a little bit of that genre, expectations that we're used to seeing in the murder crime mystery thriller, so to speak, with how that film was structured. And I'm not expecting movies like this to do a beat by beat, bulletin point of like, got to follow have to have this act, you have to have this in your act, in your second act, you have to have this as your climax, as your conclusion or whatever. But I wanted something a little bit more out of the structure. Like, the when he's talking to the psychiatrist, I thought, oh, okay, so we're probably going to spend the whole time here, and we're sort of going to, sort of like Double Indemnity kind of did, where we're going to cut back and forth between the going flashbacks and then going to the present, where he's at the doctor's office and he's telling him like, doctor, how do I how can I solve this issue I'm having, with me not being able to get it up. um and I think, that would have been one example of solving the, structuralist issue with it. Because even something like Breathless is another, like, in my opinion, a pretty good movie in terms of like, it's able to tell its story within like 90 minutes. I was around there, 90 minutes or so, and it was all told in like like a couple days at most, or even something along the lines of, what was the other film that I'd seen, from Cleo 5 to 7, which is a really good movie. And that was one where I thought, it's another movie where it doesn't really have much of a structure. It's all told in one day, but there's enough interesting things going on within that day that kept me invested with the story. And I like I said, I was with it enough at times to where I was like, okay, now I'm interested. Okay, now I'm not interested so much. You know what I mean?
I sort of understand what you're getting at, and what I was grasping at earlier, I couldn't quite name it, but the commedia all'italiana genre, which was sort of started off by Big Deal on Madonna Street. That was kind of the inciting film that allowed the movement to flourish in Italy. And what it was characterized by was sort of what I referenced. It's these sort of light-hearted comedies that often feature a lot of slapstick and risque sexual content, but that also tackle these big, important social issues. And I think a big part of the comedy, especially in those early films, was the sort of unexpected nature of these films. The fact that Italy has this very proud neo realist tradition, and those movies tackle those big issues, but they're very serious in tone, and they are very much putting your face down in the muck and forcing you to sort of endure the horrors of living in post war Italy. Whereas these films are still revealing a lot of that inequality that exists within society and trying to touch upon some of these big issues, but not in the same sort of didactic manner. And this movie represents a departure from that, even in a way. It goes even further in being comedic and zippy and light, and it doesn't necessarily have those serious moral concerns that we might associate with an Italian film from this period. I sort of liked the fact that there was at least an attempt to deviate from narrative convention. I suppose I agree that they shouldn't have even introduced the psychiatrist in a way if they weren't going to use that as a structuring absence
Yeah.
throughout the film. It's sort of difficult once you've introduced that element into the narrative for the audience to be comfortable with it being largely abandoned in the following scenes. At the same time, I do feel as though there is a light structure here, a loose structure,
Yeah.
in that we do split the film up into essentially a series of vignettes that involve him encountering various women until you get the big finale where, Lizzie's character, I'm going to say it's Lizzie, uh, Gigliola, she's the woman that he's really meant to be with, and they have a deeper connection. And I suppose a sort of classic Monticelli touch at the end of the film is that they are together, but his sexual dysfunction has not been solved. So that's sort of humorous. That's kind of a dark note to end the film on. At the same time, I don't feel as though this fully succeeds as a sort of light entertainment that wants to keep you on your feet. It doesn't offer enough surprises, and I have to admit that I was expecting something that was more daring, that was more provocative. And I feel as though the presentation of sexual content here is probably more explicit and progressive than what you would see in a Hollywood film,
Hmm.
but it's still not as daring as something that you might get out of other foreign films from this period.
Yeah, I'm not familiar too much with the foreign films made around this time outside of, like I said, War and Peace and some of the others I did on that podcast. At the same time though, yeah, I don't know. I agree with your stance on that. Because I was thinking to myself, like, you could have done this, you could have told this interestingly in a much more interesting way with the sexual content with uh the film. And yeah, I don't know. It just, you know, it wasn't necessarily like in one ear out the other because I've seen a lot more like more forgettable movies, but at the same time, I just wish that I had more like I wished I had gotten more of an emotion out of the movie to where I'd remember it, long after it was done. Um, like I said, like there were definitely some parts that were amusing, and maybe that's the other thing you said about you were talking about the vignettes, and I think that right there kind of lies into the problem with like the vignettes themselves aren't too interesting, and they would be funny or hilarious in any way if I at least understood a little bit of character with what this guy was, the main character was, but played by Marcel Andrea. If I learned a bit more about Andrea, even though yeah, they give you the opening and they tell you a little bit, like how he's
Isn't
kind of a
it
dick.
Andrea?
I'm sorry.
Isn't it Andrea?
I think it's Andrea.
It's just the way you were saying
Yeah.
Andrea,
Yeah,
like
Andrea. Yeah.
he was,
Oops. Yeah. Well,
he's an American
yeah,
he's an American secretary from Michigan or
yeah,
something.
yeah, a male secretary, but I don't know. Yeah, like I said, it just I wish that I had more of an impact with the movie because as a whole, I just think it's fine. It's
Mhm.
if you're interested in this kind of movie, I think you'll definitely appreciate a bit more about it. Um, But yeah, and even another film, I know you'd probably disagree with me on this, but even something like Licorice Pizza was another one where it had like a lot of vignette moments in the film, but I thought they were
Uh,
interesting enough in and themselves, and or even there were enough interesting characters in those vignettes within Licorice Pizza. I was like, okay, I can kind of get into this a lot more than I could something like this.
mhm.
Yeah,
And
I'm
you were really turned on by the pedophilic nature of the central relationship.
I,
That's what you
It
liked
it
about
wasn't
the
no,
film.
well, it wasn't really that. I didn't really find that big of an issue with it just because they weren't
Okay.
clearly like I mean, at the end it's kind of I mean, we're I don't want to spoil too much of Licorice Pizza, but they're not really having sex until like the end, where it's like kind of implied to where it's like maybe they are, but either way, like I didn't really like, there were other things about it that I gravitated towards with that
Mm,
movie besides that relationship, which I understand a lot of people had issue with it. It just didn't bother me just because it wasn't the
yeah.
main focus of that film. Um
It didn't bother me either, but, one question that I do have about this film,
yeah.
which relates more generally to Italian cinema in general, the dubbing. I
Yes.
always find them frustrating. I think they've gotten slightly better at it over the years, but Italian cinema of the 60s and 70s, there's just no sync between the audio that you're hearing and whatever the hell is going on with the mouths of the
Yeah. Oh my
actors. They
god.
could be saying nonsense. And in a lot of cases, they are. Federico Fellini famously just had the actors on set just say whatever, and then they would essentially write and record the script
Oh my god.
later. And I know a lot of people defend this and say, oh, actually, it creates this really interesting tension between the meaning of what they're saying and the sort of flat delivery of it. I don't necessarily agree. Maybe that makes me a Philistine. I'm not a fan of it. I would prefer it if you recorded the dialogue in a manner that was somewhat professional,
Yeah.
and so it wasn't just distracting. And okay, 90% of the time, it's a problem because the person doing the voiceover is bad at their job, and you end up with this weird delivery where it does not match up in the slightest to the facial expressions of the actor on screen,
Yeah.
or just the emotional tenor of the scene that they're in.
Yeah, that also could have been another issue as to why I couldn't get that much attached to the movie, just because there was a lot of like apparent dubbing throughout the most of the film.
Mhm.
And I'm really like, I'm just kind of sick and tired. Like, that was part of the reason why growing up I was never a big fan of the Godzilla movies that my brother watched, like constantly watched all the time. And it was because he watched like the English dubs, and I'm like, I can't do it. I just like, I can't, because it's not even if the actors are doing their best to like, they're lip syncing to the words that the characters are saying in their own language, in their own language for the movie. It still bothers me because the actor just does not have the inflection that the actor gave on set. um yeah, it's always an issue. That's why I much prefer, if you're gonna do any kind of dubbing, it's like, just put on subtitles. I mean, granted, Italian was like, oh, we'll dub over the actors and we'll put subtitles for the dubbing, and I'm like, okay, sure. Um, yeah, the
Mm.
other there the only other couple comments I'll make about the movie is I'm looking through my notes real quick.
Mm.
Okay, so the
One
you go ahead.
Sorry, one note that I just want to make is that I do think it avoids doing what I feel as though 90% of these sort of all-star comedies that bank on their casts do, where 60% of the film, say, just consists of moments where, oh, famous actor shows up and you're meant to applaud and just ignore the fact that there's 10 minutes of screen time where they don't do anything that's even remotely funny. I feel as though a lot of these movies are overly reliant on star power, do not give actors who are capable of being charismatic and winning on screen anything worthwhile to do. And it ends up sort of making you hate movie stars in a
Hmm.
weird way. There's something so smug about a lot of these movies that, oh, yes, you'll just happily sit there and watch me essentially read the phone book. I'm
Yeah.
not doing anything interesting on screen. And I hate that. You watch The Great Race or The Yellow Rolls Royce, and there's just nothing interesting happening in these films. And we look back on this period fondly because you did have a lot of collaboration between international film production houses, and you had all of these movies where Swedish actors and Italian actors and British actors would work together. But
Mm.
what we ignore is that most of these movies were awful, which is a shame.
And you're referring to the Italian cinema, like when you were mentioning about random
Yes,
stars.
some Italian cinema, yeah.
Okay.
But also in Hollywood cinema,
Yeah.
there was definitely an attempt to incorporate these international stars into Hollywood films
Yeah.
without considering what it was that made these stars popular in the first place. And so you end up with, say, an Italian sex symbol who gets completely neutered when they appear in some American movie, and you sort of forget why you even liked them in the first place. It's frustrating.
They're being exploited for what they're being famous for.
Yeah, no, it's just annoying. You get the sense that these are movies that essentially exist so that some producer can show his friends, hey, I managed to sign up all of these big stars to appear in this film. The whole spectacle of the movie is just, wow, someone managed to get all of these people together. They negotiated a really good contract, and the movie itself is just miserable to
Yeah.
sit through.
Like if you got The Rock to do like a 10-minute cameo and they just do nothing to the story other than be like, hey, look, it's The Rock. He's charismatic. He's smiling, just like how you like him to be.
But oh, Matthew, I know which movie you're talking about. Someone has been watching Why Did I Get Married To?
Oh, I didn't even. Okay.
You a secret Tyler Perry fan over
Oh,
here.
I didn't even know. I keep forgetting that those films exist, honestly. And to be honest, I
Oh,
haven't. The only Tyler Perry movies I've seen are the ones where he was in Oscar nominated stuff like Gone Girl, Vice, and Don't Look Up, unfortunately. Um,
oh, you didn't throw down $15 and watch Temptation
no.
Confessions of a Marriage Counselor when it hit cinemas?
No, I went to go see G.I. Joe Retaliation that weekend. I'm like, yeah, screw it. I'll go see G.I. Joe.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That was like 10 years ago. My taste in movies now have been, well, they were different compared to what they were back then, but um yeah, yeah, the only other
How
couple. Yeah,
old
you go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question for you. How old do you think Marcello Mastroianni was when he made this movie?
I'm going to say
Give us
he
an estimate.
okay, so I didn't do the full research, or I didn't have time to do the
Don't
research
look
because
it
of
up,
scheduling, but I'm going
okay?
to say he was in his 30s.
Ha! He was 41.
Oh wow, okay, could have fooled me.
He was,
Um
yeah, youthful looking. He was years away from having an affair with Faye Dunaway. He was
oh.
on top of the world.
Oh. Yeah, I'm
And
looking.
then he was with Catherine Deneuve.
Catherine Deneuve. Okay. Huh. Interesting. Yeah. The only kind of couple notes I'll have for the movie, and then we'll move on unless there's anything else you want to add, yourself. But the only two, like, other couple of notes I brought up was, admittedly, I did think it was a little funny when the professor, not the professor, the psychiatrist told, uh, uh, um, the main character that he admits to wearing stockings, and I thought the
Oh,
reaction that Marcelo Mastroianni gave was
Marciano.
yeah, sorry. I know
Sorry.
I'm gonna get flogged for mispronouncing his name. I apologize. But the way that he reacted to that, to what his psychiatrist said, I was like, okay, that's a little funny. Also, I don't know if you've ever been to a circus. but what kind of circus event has a performance where you'd have like a gunslinger or two fire at balloons that are like pinned on like a wall or whatever? Like, what kind of event is that? Like, I understand like lion tamer, elephant, horse rider around the area, but like, really, a
I don't
guns?
know, Matthew, you've seen Nightmare Alley. You know what can happen on the circus circuit.
Yeah, but there weren't
The
any. But like Bradley Cooper wasn't throwing pistols at anyone to be like, "Oh, but we got to shoot these
He
balloons
was
to show how great I
biting
was."
chickens' heads off.
Yeah,
Rooney Mara was getting electrocuted.
yeah, fake electrocuted. Um,
Yeah, they were, putting it
I
all out there.
I mean, those kind of made sense. They were, they were. I don't know. They didn't seem, like the gunslinging one is just like, okay, you're just showing off your ego. That's all. Like, ooh, look at how cool he's able to do
Mm.
it in one shot. It's like, okay, whatever. Just have like a gun shooting contest. I don't know. Yeah, and like I said, I thought, unless you have any other final thoughts you want to give on the movie itself, Casanova 70. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, on a final note, I would like to say that they should bring back this genre of film that is just about a womanizer. This sort of movie has kind of disappeared. I feel there's no longer an appetite for it.
Yeah,
And modern sex comedies, I think it just doesn't have the same thrill because now pornography is available on the internet. So some director who wants to make a piece of art, who wants to make a real feature film, can no longer sell that movie to depressed teenage boys who can't get a girlfriend. He can no longer sort of string a whole plot around one or two scenes in which boobs are revealed on screen. That's just gone, that entire market. And so I guess there's a weird nostalgia that one feels when they watch a movie like this, where just a film where characters talk about sex was thrilling back in 1965.
yeah.
People were so repressed.
Yeah, well, I think the other thing too regarding with that is for one, I was told that not necessarily we're getting a womanizer kind of movie like this, but I'm pretty sure I was told that some movies we're getting this year, like Poor Things, they're like sex is back in cinema. Um and I'm like, okay, well, at least we're gearing towards that a little bit, because I hear that was pretty uh risque and very showy with its nudity, so to speak. But we'll have to see how that turns out in like December or whenever that comes out. But yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, you brought up a really good point about, we haven't really had like a womanizer kind of movie like this in a long time. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see if there's any director who's up to the challenge of pulling that sword out and being like, I have another womanizing movie, whatever. So
Mm,
yeah.
yes. And
Um
one last question
yeah,
for
go ahead.
you. Are Italians sexier? Is everything sexier in Italian?
Um
Are you Julia Roberts in Eat, Pray, Love? Are you going to start using the word attraversiamo in day-to-day life?
I've never seen Eat Pray Love because I don't watch those romantic uh films to begin with. I guess I'd have to do more research
Look,
into
it's a movie
Italians.
about how you can only really discover yourself on- once you've abandoned your husband to have an affair with James Franco.
Oh, that's what the movie is about?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yep.
Yeah, not a great plan, especially when you see James Franco's future.
Mm,
Um,
yes.
yeah, like I said, as regarding to Casanova 70, it was fine. Like it definitely had its moments of interest, and there were aspects to it I'm like, okay, I could see how this could work. on paper, like the idea is interesting in of itself with the movie. Yeah, no, like I said, I just thought it was a decent movie. Before we close out the show, though, I have one other question, which might be pretty quick and easy to go through. Do you think that Casanova 70 was worthy of its sole Oscar nomination, and would you have nominated it for any of the other categories?
I don't think it's deserving of any Oscar nominations. I don't think it's one of the best films of this year, but it's not the most egregious nomination that you'll come across, and it's certainly better than something like The Sand Pebbles, which got nominated for a bunch of awards around this time. So I can't get mad at it, but I don't fully understand why this is the Italian comedy that got a nomination.
You weren't that big of a fan of Robert Wise?
I like Robert Wise. I don't like this movie. He made The Sound of Music, and then he decided to take a big dump. Uh,
Yeah. All right.
I'm sorry, did you enjoy it? Did you like watching Steve McQueen and Candice Bergen exchanging sort of creamy smiles while they try to convince us that they're in love?
I've actually haven't seen Sand Pebbles yet. There's a couple of his
Oh,
I
oh.
there's a couple of his movies I want to watch. I remember seeing. I'm looking through his filmography right now. I saw the original The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was surprisingly decent. And I
Mm,
was impressed back then. I even liked it at all, just because of how my tastes have evolved over the years. I'm like, oh, I could have sworn I would have hated that, but I actually enjoyed it.
yeah.
To where I could
Well,
appreciate.
now Matthew is a cultured sophisticate.
Yeah,
He is a pretentious intellectual. He's going to start wearing berets
yeah,
and
sure, yeah.
and learning Russian
I'm gonna
and
I'm gonna make sure I taste my wine. Like how you lift your hand
oh
up and
yes,
you're very like, he's very
you're going to become a
unsophisticated.
geophile.
Yeah. He doesn't
Yeah.
understand what great movies are if it bit him in the butt. Whatever. That
Yes.
pompous asshole.
You're
But
going to start watching free associative cinema
yeah.
and yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a couple of movies from him. I'm definitely curious in seeing The Haunting, because I hear that's a really, really good psychological thriller, so to speak, or you know, a really good movie to throw on around Halloween for sure. So I'll try to watch
Mm,
that. But I have seen West Side Story and Sound of Music, which I like both of them. And I think Robert Wise is a good enough director to where I'm like, I want to see more of his work for sure. Um, yeah. So yeah, I'll keep that in mind for his movies. Yeah, as far as like my take on the Oscars, like I'm not, like I'm kind of like with you. I'm like I don't think this is necessarily deserved an Oscar nomination, but I'm not too pissy about it because we've seen much worse and much more egregious uh nominees come by and actually win the Oscar. Especially in the last like 15 to 20 years alone. It's like, really? Did that have to get a screenplay nomination at all? Okay, you only did it. You probably only did it just because you enjoyed the movie or whatever. But I don't really see the appeal. But whatever. It's as you said, there's much worse that you could have nominated for the original screenplay category. This isn't one of them, but I personally wouldn't have given it one to begin with. So yeah, that's pretty much our show for today. And like I said, I just want to say thank you again, Zita, for dedicating your time to be here on the show. Before we officially sign off, is there anything you'd like to plug in, or where our listeners can follow you along for your hot takes?
mm. Yes, so I'm on Twitter at Zeta_short, and I'm on Letterboxd at Zeta Short, and you can follow what I'm writing on the In Session Film website. I'm on Rotten Tomatoes now, so that's very exciting.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, yeah. um, Yeah,
Whoa!
yeah. Anyway, we're moving. Anyways, you can.
I'm accepting $50 to write uh, dodgy reviews of Ophelia.
Oh, so that's why you give such low ratings for some of these like critically acclaimed movies. Like, hey, we want you to shit on this like masterpiece of a movie, like Everything Everywhere All at Once. You know, could you shit on Coda
What?
too?
Everything Everywhere All at Once is no masterpiece, but
Yeah.
sure.
Anyways, you can follow me and the show through Linktree under at Matthew995, where you can follow along on all my social media accounts such as Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. On the same site, I've also provided a link for where you could listen along to more episodes of the show. And if you're interested in being in the hot seat, let me know, and hopefully we can arrange that happening in the future. In the meantime, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, and we hope to see you at the movies. Take care, guys.